Hi, this is Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I am the author of The Snowball System, and I and my teams have trained over 15,000 high-end professionals all over the world on sound, effective, and authentic business development techniques. I'm joined today by Todd Henry. Todd has written 5 different, very well-selling books. Really exciting. He's a New York Times bestseller. The book I read was his first, called The Accidental Creative. We worked with some of the same editing team, which is really exciting. So we know some of the same folks in the book industry. And a client, thanks Clinton, a client had given me The Accidental Creative years ago, and I just absolutely loved it. So when some mutual friends suggested that I have Todd on the show, I was just elated. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a brilliant idea. Why didn't I think of Todd? I think I read one of his books. I went back and grabbed it, refreshed my mind on it, and absolutely loved The Accidental Creative. What I love about this episode is we get into the very specifics of how you can use I know this will sound crazy, but how can you use a process of creativity to impact business development? So we're sort of mashing up the two ideas, the accidental creative and the snowball system in our Grow Big training. And it's really fun. So in this one, we're going to do just that. Now, before we get into it, know that you can get our best and latest thinking on how you can grow your book of business, grow your relationships, and grow your career at growbigplaybook.com. Go to growbigplaybook.com, sign up there. It takes about 20 seconds, and you will get our best insights delivered right to your inbox. It's awesome. growbigplaybook.com. I write this newsletter myself, comes out weekly. You can usually read it in 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm giving you our latest thinking, including all the courses that we publish at no charge. Our complimentary courses are launched there. Really cool stuff, growbigplaybook.com. All right, here is Todd Henry. Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I am beyond excited to bring you Todd Henry. Todd's written several books on lots of different content, and the one that I've read that I really loved is called The Accidental Creative. We have a bunch of friends in common in the book industry that help bring accidental creative to life. It sold a ton of copies, and Todd has a lot of value to help us. So Todd, here's your first question. You know our audience, people with one foot in the delivery of some expertise-driven solution. They have one foot in business development. And a lot of what they need to do is sort of do the unexpected. They have to be unique. They have to stand out a little bit. They have to be creative in the way that they approach their client relationships and add value and always work in this proactive, helpful way. So, Todd, what's your big idea on what folks like that can do to stand out, to be creative, to do their best work, to get their clients and prospects' attention? All right, go.
So, one thing I would say is a lot of people think that they're not creative because they don't make art. Creativity is problem solving. So, if you're in business development, if you are in customer relationship management, if you're in any line of work that requires consistent problem solving, you have to be creative every day. The challenge is, I think a lot of people think that creativity is about spontaneity, right? Either you're creative or you're not. Either you can come up with that great idea, that brilliant insight in the moment, or you can't. It's just something that's baked into you. That's not the reality. Most of the successful creative professionals that I encounter have disciplines in their life. They have practices that they build into their daily rhythms, their weekly rhythms to prepare them for those moments when they have to be brilliant. So, for example, they build things like study time into their schedule so that they're filling their mind with valuable stimuli. They have dots to connect. When they're in a conversation with a customer, they can say, hey, it's interesting. I was just reading something the other day that applies to your situation. Let me tell you about that. And so they're creatively applying something that they just experienced to the current circumstance. So if you want to be brilliant at a moment's notice, which we all want to do and need to do in order to be successful, you have to begin far upstream from the moment that you need that brilliant idea. And it begins by building practices into your life to prepare you for those moments when you have to deliver great results.
Todd, this is so rich, and it aligns so well with what we teach in the snowball system, where there's things that people should do annually, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, things like that, to stay on top of relationship building, to stay on top of being proactively helpful. So, follow-up question, in today's world, our professionals are their partners or senior partners, big consulting or law or accounting firms, big professional services, their account managers, account execs, client execs at big service-based companies. Man, they are back to back all day long. They're in these days we're taping this in the pandemic. It's Zoom call after Zoom call. In the old days, it was flying around the country and getting in at 11 p.m. and then getting up for breakfast and having your whole day mapped out the next day at clients or at offices you're visiting internally. So, how do people do it, Todd? How do people build in that time in a way that they can be creative? You know, your world. They can do business development, stay on top of the proactive long term things. Our world. I think you have a lot to add to our audience here. What's your best advice?
The interesting challenge is I think a lot of us thought that working remotely, which most of us have been doing for the last year, was going to give us more time, to do things like that. The challenge is that meetings now have absolutely no transaction cost whatsoever. In the past, when you had a meeting, you had to schedule travel time to get to the meeting, or you had to schedule time in between the meetings because people had to move from meeting to meeting. And even if you're in the same office space, you have to go to a different floor, you have to, go to a different building or whatever. There was at least some baked in buffer in our schedule. Now, many of us, and I'm working with a lot of clients, as I'm sure you are, Mo, who literally have no buffer from the time they sit down at their laptop in the morning to the time that they end their workday, because it's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, because there's no transaction cost. We jump from space to space, with the click of a button. So, what that means for all of us, and regardless of whether we're working in person or we're working virtually, what that means for all of us is we have to identify time on the calendar ahead of time to engage in these disciplines. There's an old saying, and I don't know who said it. I wish I did. Where your calendar and your money goes, that shows you what's really important to you. So the reality is, if we want to be prepared for those moments when we have to be brilliant, that means we have to look at our calendar ahead of time and say, okay, I'm going to strategically block off time to study. I'm going to strategically block off time to sit and to think about my priorities, to define my most important outcomes, my most important objectives, to time block, to be able to engage in deep creative work on the work that's most important to me. You may think, I need to find some time this week to think strategically about how to reach out to this client or how to nurture this relationship. That's not going to happen in the cracks and crevices of your Zoom meetings, right? In the 30 seconds between meetings that you might have. You're going to have to strategically time block for that, which might mean you're going to spend a couple of hours feeling really unproductive. And that's the thing about creativity, is that it's rarely efficient. We're not going for efficiency. We're going for effectiveness, long-term effectiveness. So that would be my encouragement is, if something is important to you, you find time for it. And it might mean you need to get up an hour earlier. It might mean you need to stay a little later. It might mean you need to carve out some time through the middle of your day to have a bit of space, have a morning meeting schedule and an afternoon meeting schedule, and try to carve some space through the middle of the day to have some deep work time, some no fly zone time, or whatever you want to call it. But I feel like it's a matter of priority and discipline. And those who are willing to take that step, that uncomfortable step to carve out strategic time on their calendar, are those who are going to see the results on the other side.
This is killer, Todd. It's so amazing how our content are just totally aligned. So I want to ask one more big question in this episode. We got so much more to cover in the next couple episodes. So I got to save some good stuff for that because I have all these notes over here. But I think the next logical question that our audience will be interested in is how do they create that no fly zone, that
Mhm.
creative problem solving time. For us in our world, it might be business development time, although it could be pure creative time for leadership of their practice, for
Sure.
developing of tools that they can use with their clients, things like that. And the thing I find people struggling with the most right now, and I think this will be true after the pandemic wanes, is being able to say no.
Mhm.
And you've got some great, so let's say they've done what you've said, they've done what I've said, they've scheduled the time, and now somebody tries to get into that time.
Yeah.
And let's say it's not just, they do 1 hour a day, it's not just one time, it's 10 times in a row or whatever. I'm seeing people really have struggling saying no to that, or trimming the less effective things that they're doing. And I know you got some great models for that. So give us your
Yeah.
best advice around how do you say no, or how do you trim the things that you've said yes to before that you want to sort of wind out of?
Yeah, so we do have to be very good at pruning, at managing our energy. We manage our time very well, but we're very not very good often at managing our energy. And one of the primary practices with regard to managing energy that I mentioned in the Accidental Creative is the importance of pruning. Just like in a good vineyard, the vine keeper routinely prunes the vine to protect resources for the more mature parts of the vine, because there are only so many resources to go around. If you just allow the vine to grow indiscriminately, then you're going to end up with a lot of mediocre fruit because there are only so many resources to go around. You can have a little bit of good fruit or a lot of mediocre fruit. And in the same way, we can have a lot of mediocre fruit in our life as a result of our efforts, or we can have a select amount of good fruit. So we have to think about our time not in terms of we all talk about spending time. We need to think about our time in terms of investment. So me blocking off 2 hours on an afternoon in the middle of the week to spend time strategically thinking about business development or strategically problem solving for my business or strategically coming up with ideas for a client, that's an investment. Now, when I invest my money, I don't expect to put money in and get a return 5 minutes later, right? I'm thinking long term. I'm thinking strategically that if I invest this money wisely, then long term there's going to be a result on the other side. That's the way we need to think about our time as well. So you should have time every week that you spend, because we have to do that. We spend time in meetings. We spend time, doing our administrative tasks or whatever we have to do, but you should also have a part of your time portfolio that is investment focused. I'm going to invest 2 or 4 or 6 hours of my work week this week in efforts that may not pay off right now, but that are an investment in future returns later. If I spend 2 hours thinking creatively right now, it could result in an idea that's going to lead to $1 million of value, 2 years from now, because the seed of an idea is planted that grows into something more substantial. We have to think about our time in terms of investment, not in terms of something that we spend every day, every week.
Todd, I love it. But I want to get super practical on this for our
Yeah,
audience. Let's say they've bought in, they've got a 2 hour block next Thursday. They
yeah,
just get an email for a calendar invite, says, "Hey, notice that you might be conflicted, but we really need you at this meeting."
yeah,
And let's say our client or our audience looks at that and they're like, You just, you know what, that's not as valuable as this investment time I want to make." But
yeah.
how do they say no? How do they well, I'll just give that to you. How do they say no to the things that are less valuable? How do they prune?
Well, one thing I would say that is very important, it's a consideration, is we have to consider who's asking for our time. If the CEO of the company calls you up and says, "I need this hour of your time," that's a very different thing than if a coworker says, "Hey, I want to get together and hash out some ideas for this client." My belief is that we need to treat this time like a meeting with ourselves. Okay. We can't fill every available hour with this kind of time. We can't just block off 6 hours a day of creative thought time. But when we do block it off, we have to be very strategic and treat it like a meeting with ourselves. So if somebody calls you and says, "Hey, I see that you have that time blocked off, but I really need you," you say, "I'm sorry, I have a meeting. Is there another time that we could find to meet?" If you're able to do that. Now, and you don't have to say, by the way, "I have a meeting with myself." You can say, "I have a meeting," right? You treat it like a
Right.
meeting with yourself. You can even come up with, I've had a couple of people tell me they've come up with pseudonyms for this time. So they'll, Bob Johnson or whatever, right? They'll just put that on their calendar in case somebody can see their calendar, but really what that is it's just a name for a meeting with themselves, right? So it's just something that we have to protect. If it's a priority, we have to protect it. And listen, if people start to see results from you doing this, which they will, then they're going to be much more gracious in allowing this. And that's what I tell leaders in organizations when I work with organizations. Listen, you have to be making the business case for decisions you're making. When you're making strategic decisions about how your team spends their time and their resources, you need to make a business case to your manager to protect that time and to protect those resources. And then you need to be constantly engaged in feedback loops with them about the results of your efforts. If people start to see the results of this, they're going to say, "You know what, that meeting with Bob Johnson, let's just let that go. That's good. That's a good thing that you have that on your calendar. Maybe we don't need you quite as much," because they're going to see that you're becoming more effective. So the reality is we have to say no to things that aren't using our time in the way that we want to use them if we want to invest our time effectively. Another really super quick tip that I learned from a friend of mine, Ricardo Crespo, who was the global creative chief at 20th Century Fox, and he obviously was being pulled into meetings all the time. And the problem with meetings, often the way that we think about them is that we schedule our meetings for 60 minutes by default, right? I want to meet with you, great, 9 to 10. I want to meet with you, great, 10 to 11. Well, first of all, that creates zero buffer between our meetings. Second of all, our meetings don't need to be 60 minutes. When we have 60 minutes, we will fill 60 minutes. But often, if we carve out a smaller amount of time for our meetings, then we'll find that we can get what we need to get done in a shorter amount of time. So Ricardo, when he was asked to be in to meet with someone, he would say, "Great, that I would love to meet with you. Meet me at the potted plant outside the elevator well on the second floor of building A at 9:22 tomorrow morning." And they would sort of think that was a little strange, but the reason he did that is because he knew he was coming out of a meeting at 9:20 with somebody in building A. He was going to be on the second floor. They would meet at that potted plant. They would have 5 minutes of conversation. The person would get what they needed, and then they would both go on their merry way. Now, if Ricardo said, "Great, yeah, meet me at my office at 9:30," they're going to sit there for a half hour. They're going to chat. They're going to talk about their families. They're going to, and so it's just a strategic way to try to find try to create effective and efficient meetings, just kind of by default. And the thing I would say about that too is, I've gotten really good at saying, yeah, hey, grab your best 10 minutes on my meeting calendar, on my meeting schedule, my meeting link, right? Or grab your best 20 minutes. Like, I've gotten really good at defining for people how much time I'm willing to give them, instead of saying, yeah, just grab some time on my scheduling tool, because that sends a signal to them, hey, we're going to get down to business. We're going to get things done quickly. Of course, with you, I said, hey, just take as much as you want, right? Mo, just grab as much time as you want. But
I
you're
booked
a
10
unique and rare
days. Is
case.
that, yeah, is that okay? I did 10 days in July. Is that fine? That's what I booked.
It's totally fine.
We'll
I'm
come
looking
over.
forward to Tahoe. I am, really. It's going to be great.
It's a lot of brainstorming, whiteboards. It's going to be awesome. Todd, that was super effective. And to put a bow on it, what I like about what you said for our audience is, one, there's two pieces to it. One is not just saying yes to what somebody asked for right in the beginning, but really digging in, figure out how much time do we need, and can we handle this in sort of a pass by situation, which can happen virtually or physical by the potted plant. And then the second thing is, once you've got that, or the Bob Johnson time, that maybe we can pull that through into our later episodes, because I think it's funny. That's our investment in our future selves. That's our investment in creativity and building and in nurturing relationships, things like that. Once you've got your Bob Johnson time, is like, how do you figure out how to keep it? How do you say no to it? How can you have a script so that when somebody tries to intrude on that, it's very unlikely they can. And if they have to, you're rescheduling it right away, as opposed to it just evaporates. So let's do this. Todd, people are going to want more of all your great content. Where should they go?
The best place to go is toddhenry.com, TODDHENRY.com. You can get to my podcast, The Accidental Creative. There, you can get to any of my books and all of my writing as well.
That's awesome. Thanks for being on the show, folks. Get this. If you like this episode, and I know you did, our next one, I'm going to ask Todd, very specifically, how can we use creativity? How can we use all of his teachings to create and close more opportunities? It's going to be great. So that's coming up next.